Mayoral Memo with Matthew Dickinson from Dubbo Regional Council.
Matthew Dickinson is the chair of Regional Cities New South Wales and I think Regional Cities Australia, Regional Capitals Australia. Matthew Dickinson, good afternoon.
I don't want to be kicking someone out of their spot, Prue, so I'm only the Secretary of Regional Capitals Australia. I'll have the chair all over me if I go taking over her position there.
Fair enough. Thank you for the correction. Appreciate it. Now, you're based in Dubbo and you have a very busy airport. We have several busy airports in regional Victoria as well. You've obviously had a good look at this white paper so far. What did you make of it in terms of regional airports and regional aviation?
Well, the first thing that's really important, Prue, is the acknowledgement that regional airports are important. And the Aviation White Paper obviously doesn't solve all the problems that we've got in regional airports, but at least it acknowledges that we've got important airports and they're important to our economy, important to residents in regional locations, important for health, important for professional services, a whole range of areas they're important for. So at least we're going down the right path. One of the real issues, Prue, with regional aviation is the cost of running those airports. Now, most of these airports are owned by the local council. In fact, we estimate around the nation there's probably 200 airports and aerodromes that are owned by local government. But unfortunately, about 60% of those airports run at a loss. So it means those local communities are subsidising those airports. Part of the issue there is just the regulatory overhead of these airports. So when we've got things like security screening, and I'm in favour of security screening, don't get me wrong, but the cost of security screening adds to the burden of that, and that typically is charged to the airlines as much as possible, which then gets passed on to the passengers, of course, which makes it dearer for people to travel in those regional locations. But even just the running of an airport, Prue, I find it quite incredible that any time we do anything with our airport here in Dubbo, for example, it's incredibly expensive, whether that be any work on the pavement or any work on the building. Any work we do always seems expensive because you've got that added regulatory overhead that you have to have with an airport, which is great from a security perspective, but it becomes expensive. So to give you an idea, in Dubbo, we charge $19.45 as a passenger fee, and then security screening is on top of that, and that's on a cost recovery basis, but it might typically be $6.60 a head. So every time someone flies out of Dubbo, there's $26 of their ticket price that goes to Dubbo Regional Council, and that's a lot more expensive than, say, a Sydney airport or a Melbourne airport, and that's really based on those numbers. So with this aviation white paper, I think there is some acknowledgement in there that there needs to be some federal government help to support some of these regional locations, regional airports, and help means basically giving us some money.
I understand too. I mean, there was some provision for funding for infrastructure upgrades and things like that. It seemed like a small amount of money, about $40 million over the next couple of years for regional airports. One of the things in the white paper is around making sure that disability access is pretty much uniform for every passenger. My guess is that a lot of regional airports will really struggle with that.
Well, you don't normally have an air bridge at a regional airport, for example, and so often you'll have stairs. Now, I know many airports have got ramps that they've started installing, but that gets expensive as well. And then you only need to roll out the ramp, excuse the pun there, the ramp's only rolled out when you've got someone that needs to have some mobility help getting onto that. So then sometimes it can be a bit embarrassing for that person because everyone knows, we've got the ramp coming up because someone has some sort of issue that needs to get on the plane. So that's just a small part of it. But I think airports and our airport, we're trying to take steps to make sure everyone has equal access. And so we're getting there. But again, it's a difficult thing because you are typically walking out on the tarmac and walking out onto the plane. So the ramp is one way of solving that. But I think equality of access is an important point you've mentioned there. It's not just about equality of access for people with a disability or people with mobility issues. It's really about equality of access for people living in regional locations versus metropolitan locations, and making sure they've got access to those various professionals, health professionals, other professionals that I mentioned before. That's something, some people might imagine that a regional airport is great for people living in a regional area to go on holidays. Yeah. That's a small part of what we use regional airports for. The major part is delivering services, so people coming out of Sydney, out of Melbourne, out to regional locations and delivering those important services, which means that we've got equal access in a regional location to some of those services.
Can I just quickly ask you, Matthew Dixon, about the situation with Rex at the moment? We know they're in voluntary administration, even though they are still running all of their important regional routes. They have been, basically underwritten by the government at this point. My understanding, though, is that there are many airports that are still creditors. What sort of impact is that having?
Absolutely a huge impact, Prue. There's approximately $600 million was one figure I'd heard that was owed by Rex to various creditors, and many councils are part of that bucket, if you like, of money. Dubbo Regional Council's owed $659,000. Now, we all know that once you go into administration, the likelihood of getting all that money back is very low. We might get 5%, 10% of that money back. And so again, the residents of Dubbo Regional Council will be left holding the can, because we don't try and use our airport as a big profit spinner, but we like to try and get to the point where we at least break even. But when you have a loss along those lines of over $600,000 that'll hit our bottom line at some stage when the administration's finished, then obviously that's going to come from somewhere, and unfortunately that'll come from the pockets of all ratepayers, not the people using the airport as such. So the aim is to make all of our business assets to cover themselves, to pay for themselves, maybe have a little bit in the black there, but it does make it difficult when you've got pressure from the airlines, and Rex was famous or infamous across the nation for putting extreme pressure on councils to try and keep their fees as low as possible. That's fine, that's Rex's prerogative to do that, but it means that you're trying to operate on skinny margins to deliver those prices that make it attractive for air travel. And of course then when you're operating on skinny margins, it makes it tough when you get a large debt like that that's not going to be paid.
Matthew Dickinson, thank you so much for filling us in this afternoon. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thanks, Prue.
Matthew Dickinson is the Chair of Regional Cities.
Mayoral Memo with Matthew Dickinson from Dubbo Regional Council.